Cool. It looks like we're running Freekbass. What's going on, brother? Thanks for making
Hey.
the time.
Oh, it's so good to be here, man. And I'm super excited that you were doing this. So thanks for letting me be a guest.
Absolutely, man. I feel like before our run-in at the airport a couple of weeks ago, before I went on my
Yeah.
honeymoon, and you went to, were you going to Nam first or were you going to TikTok first?
I was thinking when I saw you, I think I was on my way to TikTok then, So I was in California a couple weeks in a row and came back to Cincinnati, then went back out to Cali for the NAMM show. But I think I was like on my way to TikTok during that point. Yeah.
Yeah. And during this part of the year, do you kind of aim to have more of your appearances, the Nam thing? Like, is your off season kind of full of the non-performance promo stuff?
For sure, and obviously with things like the NAM show and the TikTok thing, which kind of came out of nowhere for me, but yeah, it's a good time to get out there and do that type of thing. I mean, it was weird because I was like in California more than I was in Ohio during January. Yeah,
Well, and I was saying hi to you at like 4:30 in the morning. It's like this man's just trying to get the air through the airport, but it's like I saw
that's
the mono
right.
bag. I was like, this is someone I need to talk to. And then free
Yes,
phase, I'm like, yes, this is what my morning needed.
yeah, yeah.
I run from my wife going on to our honeymoon. I'm like, I gotta go say hi to a buddy right
And
now.
where were you got on your way to?
St. Lucia for my honeymoon. We did 10
Oh,
days at a beautiful
wow,
resort out there. Yeah.
wow, not
But
too shabby.
no, dude, it was everything we could ever want, and me and the wife had a great time. But I need to take like at least a nylon string with me. Do you find that even during personal travel, if you don't have an instrument, that you get twitchy? You know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I have a bass in my hand. I was just telling this to somebody last night. I mean, I probably have a bass in my hand 20, 18, 20, whatever sleep, maybe one and a half hours that when I'm awake that I don't have it in my hand is probably the better way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's very telling as to the amount of hours that you pour into this. I mean, you're how many years into your career as Freekbass, as a front man, and running this as kind of your, I wouldn't say solo ship, but really making sure that your character is known by the masses. How many years you been doing that?
I started really right at the very beginning of the 2000s, that's when Bootsy produced my first album and I started kind of getting out there. Probably 2003, 2004 is when I actually started getting out there and starting to tour a little bit under my name and the many incarnations of my name. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And when you had met up with Bootsy, like when I look at your playing compared to what the Zilla has done, it's like it doesn't necessarily sound like he's your first funk icon on bass. Like who is kind of your predecessor for your slap techniques and the way that you run lines?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, obviously because of me and Bootsy's working relationship, we're from Cincinnati and everything too as well. But I get that comparison a lot, but you are correct. Probably, I mean, I would say more, I'm a huge Larry Graham fan from Sly and the Family Stone.
Yeah.
And he's been a huge influence on mine. It's funny because, obviously everybody knows my style of bass playing, which is, thumping and plucking and stuff like that. But, people like Larry and Lewis Johnson and Bootsy, Lewis Johnson from the Brothers Johnson, you know, believe it or not, I'm not a big fan of like what is coined today as slap bass. I'm just not a big fan of that style because a lot of times, and this is, I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody at all, but like a lot of times it feels like people kind of get more caught up in the technique of it versus the note of it. And that the reason why, like, I love people like Larry Graham and Bootsy and Lewis Johnson, a lot of the older school guys, is because when Larry invented that style of bass playing, he wasn't like, hey, let me show everybody this cool technique I'm doing. He was doing it out of necessity for the song. And it's always like, to me, that's the song is always number one. And the note is all, as a bass player, the note is always number one. Yes, I happen to do this technique to kind of create the tone I'm trying to put out there, but it's not about like, the acrobatics of it. It's more about it's ultimately about the tone and about the note. And I think a lot of times when people get into that technique, not everybody obviously, but there's sometimes where again it gets to be more about the clackety clack and the acrobatics of it versus the actual tonality of it, and
Absolutely.
so yeah, so that's why I was always gravitating to it. And another huge big influence on my playing, believe it or not, well, two that are non-bass players, I would say, is Bootsy's brother, Catfish. I mean, once I learned all of Bootsy's bass lines, all the James Brown stuff, I'd learn all the guitar stuff on guitar. Then I was like, I wonder what those would sound, the guitar parts would sound like on bass. And so I started trying to play those guitar parts on bass. And then also Bernie Worrell, keyboardist from, Parliament Funkadelic and Talking Heads. Bernie, so many that, he played so much bass, but it was on keyboard, but it was like those tones and those feels I was trying to always recreate on my bass, whether it be through effects or some of my playing techniques or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think with Larry and where his style of slap came about, like I'd always heard that story, like a drummer didn't show up for a gig, so he's pretty much doing a kick and snare part on there.
Yeah.
And whereas I see similar to what you were saying, a lot of modern slap playing is almost overstepping into the drummer's lane. Whereas you're pretty much, when I watch your relationship with your drummer, especially our last Thanksgiving show,
Yeah.
you're really trying to accentuate where he wants things to lay. It's like there's not going to be any fight over what the hi-hat's doing. I'm going to stay clear
Right.
of that lane, and we're going to make sure that these units move together in a very congruent, cohesive way.
Yeah. 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 Hey, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Growing up in an era where Moog sounds and whatnot were so big, and still having such a percussive but intuitive style in that way, did you have any tonality shaping that you tried to take out of slap playing so it kind of fit more of that that Moog sound, that guttural but less intrusive kind of tone?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and again, going back to you were bringing up Larry. Once when as you were speaking, one song that came to my mind is there's the Sly and Family Stone song "Everyday People," and Larry plays one note the entire song, one note. And that's the thing. A lot of times people, again, getting back to the technique side of everything, is like, yeah, I love being, I get crazy on my bass and do all the get nutty on there too as well. But one of my favorite bass lines of all time is Papa Was a Rolling Stone, and the whole song is 3 notes the entire song, even the extended 7 minutes version. There's no fills in there. It's literally da 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 entire time. And to be able to play 3 notes for 5, 6, 7 minutes and still have the listener hypnotized by those 3 notes, to me, that is genius, and those are the bass lines. That's what got me into bass, whether it be that or like More Bounce to the Ounce by Zapp. That's a good example. You're talking about the Moog thing. It's like, those were the tones. I mean, I remember being a kid. I remember exactly where I was at. I was at a hardware store with my dad. And there used to be, for the Cincinnati people will know this, on Plainville Road, there used to be I think it was called Howard's Hardware. It was right there on Plainville Road. It's a restaurant now. It's over there, over in the Madison Place, Madisonville area. And I was sitting there, and a guy was walking down the street, and he had a big boom box, and he was playing More Bounce to the Ounce, and I was like, what is that coming out? That sound? Like, I was like hypnotized by that sound. I was just starting to get into music. I was a little kid, and I was like hearing those tones, and I was like, I always remember as a bass player, those are like, that's what drew me to the bass too, as well as like the tones that could come out of that thing. I didn't know that it was a bass keyboard at that time, but I was like, it was just that frequency was like, that's what I was always drawn towards. Yeah.
Yeah. When there's an interesting technology curve at that point in time, especially with Sly stuff, where the way that they're pushing bass through the mix, even if you're playing string bass, is kind of reminiscent of a Moog in the way that's just
Yeah.
thick audio file that nothing is getting in the way of. I think of like In Time and things like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
yeah, great.
3/4 of this mix is pretty much just this great overdriven bass part.
Yeah.
And I imagine that with the limitations of speakers at a certain point in time, it's like, all right, we kind of need to clear out our chordal accompaniment, let these horns be pretty much, drum parts, as some would kind of allude to. And it's interesting the way that the limitations made the art more grooving. It kind of it forced it to be the style of the era.
Yeah, and also just taking chances in production, like going to the I was talking about Bernie before, like probably his most famous bass line as a keyboard player is "Flashlight," and that's all Bernie on Moog. And, George Clinton sitting behind the board. I was lucky enough to, when I worked at, I had a radio show on a station called WNKU a few years ago. It was like a funk radio show, and we got to interview George Clinton on there. And one of the first questions I asked him, because I was always interested to know, is like, were you, when those albums were being mixed, were you there in by the board with the engineer? When the mixing was like, oh yeah, I was 100% there. And George was the one that was like, no one would have thought to push the keyboard up that loud in the mix. They would have been like, your typical engineer been like, no, 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 you got to balance it out, make everything, and he's just like,
Yeah.
all the way, and taking those chances. And that's why we have that song today. And that's why Flashlight is so iconic too, because of those tones.
Yeah, and it's interesting now that we're seeing folks like Bootsy and George getting more attention for their spot in music history, and I think just the internet's allowed for more personality to come through versus an era where the music spoke for the people in a lot of ways. And I don't think George is still getting the recognition as the music mogul that he was. It's like his business was trying to expose you to the personality of everyone on his roster through these sounds, and by being that aggressor in the mix, or by being the innovator with the technology, or somewhat just, I wouldn't say careless, but carefree, to kind of make some of these choices that are not even stylistic. They're more about the attitude. Uh, it's a hope of mine that before George's time in this funky universe is done, that he really gets that place as one of the great music businessmen than just one of the great artists and vocalists that we see of him.
Yeah, and I think you are now. I mean, he just got obviously the star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Actually, when I was at TikTok, that was the week he was there too as well. I found out like 10 minutes, and I was literally like 5 minutes. I like my buddy, he's like, you're in Hollywood, right? Did you see George get a star? I'm like, I didn't even know he was here. I found out like, I was reading it on the internet. I'm like, oh, he's like 2 blocks from where I'm at. But yeah, so I think right now like him and Bootsy both are, now really starting, and people are starting to understand where that DNA was from.
Yeah, and I'd imagine with the streaming services, that so much has changed with the way that music's availability in your pocket has kind of soiled listeners to appreciating the full packaging of it, whether that's the way vinyl feels in your hand, or the way it feels to anticipate an album, wait to go get it to save up your money to do so. But I really hope that, especially as it relates to the early eras of hip hop in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, getting to trace some of these samples back to the original catalog and appreciating all the raw material that he gave to the world that may not have been top 10 hits at the time, but it was the building blocks of those top 10 hits. And he deserves a more prominent place as the innovator of that kind of hypnotic groove. Like you're saying, there's a lot of people that know how to make 3 notes grooving for 7 minutes, but I think all of us have a level of immaturity at an early part in our career to want to do that, to make it work in that way.
Yeah.
Versus like, how long is the actual loop of Atomic Dog before they flip that thing reverse? It's like, it's not a long song.
Right. True. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And taking all those chances, I mean, that's the thing too, as well. And I think that's the reason why him and Bootsy both are so viable, even to, they're not lopped in with like oldie, a lot of like their contemporaries, who are doing more like kind of like oldie tours, type thing. I mean, George is still playing very cutting edge festivals. Bootsy does the same thing. And those guys continue in their career to always take chances, whether it be Bootsy working with like people like Buckethead, or, really, stretching himself out in different areas. And obviously George as well. And still being, relevant in terms of like, cutting edge and contemporary music,
Yeah, well, especially as it relates to that Silk Sonic album that came out, 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
There's a place for him in there that's not just an artist feature. He is the figurehead and the mastermind of what that sound was going to be. And for guys like Bruno and Anderson to say, this is the master of the universe, Bootsy.
Yeah.
Like, these cameos are more about the personality than the essence of the playing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that was great to see. And I mean, I know from being in the room with Bootsy, I mean, he brings a certain energy when you're working with him. It's that X factor that you just can't describe. It's just that being around that musical he's just such a conduit for so many things musically. It's an honor always to be in a room with him to record stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something really special to see too is as our heroes age, no one gets an easy walk out of this life necessarily. And
Sure.
so whether it's the way it affects your playing or the way it affects your day-to-day mobility, uh, building building your career is one thing, but building the things that sustain you in the way that his marriage with Patty has kind of made him
Yeah.
last in a different type of way. It's like I know you to be a very proud family man that has an incredible support system that takes as much time to put together as a music career does. Like, what advice would you give to young artists about building that tight knit circle of trusting, loving support?
Yeah, I mean that is really, and that's such a great thing. That's really everything because this career you're doing this almost daily. It's like I'm on top of the world, everything sucks. I'm on top of the world, everything sucks. I'm on top of the world, and that's why I think a lot of musicians succumb to a lot of drugs and alcohol and stuff like that because you're trying to either one suppress those feelings or one trying to keep that high of the way you feel when you have those highs, when those highs aren't currently happening, and having a support system around you when you're not on stage or you're not in the studio, and to not just for them to help you but for you to be able to pour out what you do to them too. It's a circular thing. It's not just one sided, not just like you just need to have people around you to help prop you up when you're down, but also you need to help. I think prop when you're giving out to other. That's the reason I enjoy teaching so much too, as well. So, and I think it's almost a responsibility as a musician, whether you're a producer or you're actually giving guitar or bass lessons or whatever instrument it is. It's almost like a responsibility as an artist for that flow of water to keep going, artistic water, I guess you could call it, to where you are giving to other people. And so having someone very close to you in a family unit giving to them, and also some of your knowledge to other people too that you're working with, it's got to be it's got to be a circle going on. It just can't be just things coming into you. Yes, you want people around you to build you up too, but you have to be able to. I think it's important for you to build other people up too as well. It's got to work. It's got to be two-sided.
Absolutely. With that more
Yeah.
regular output, whether that's the ability to cook a meal for a loved one or
Yeah.
just to have a non-musical interaction with somebody that's a listener, loves what you do there, and be more, I don't want to just say personable, because one thing I really admire about your teaching style is it's clearly a vocation. There's things that you want to do in this life, and there's things you're called to do in this life.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are able to turn a blind eye to the things we might be called to do. And sometimes you need a bit of that spiritual element in your life to wake up to why you must do that. But clearly, you have a great appreciation for the folks who took that time for you in your life. And now, especially through TikTok and other internet platforms, your willingness to show people how you've approached your instrument and why you approach it that way. Like, I got a buddy named Dave McClellan who you taught to slap as a young man. Now
Oh,
he
nice.
plays with Miles Nielsen and the Rusted Hearts. They're on tour with Dawes right now. And the few times that he's come and sat in with us, it's like, I didn't know this guy could slap. And then he
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
some of your isms in there. And it's like,
Oh,
it's
nice.
it's so great to hear how much you've taken that time to deconstruct your own playing so that it is consumable by people, and these parts of your personality that come out through the way you thump and pluck, or the way you think about lines and try to keep people hypnotized in that way, it will serve generations past.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Well, the one thing I always try to focus on, and we talked about this at the beginning of our conversation today, is it's all about the song. And I know it sounds cliche, but it's when you're writing a bass line or playing a bass line that someone else has written, it has to serve the songs. And no matter what the technique is, whether it's thumping, fingerstyle, pick playing, whatever you do, whatever instrument for that matter, it's like the song comes first, not your acrobatics. That's part of it, and the tonality you're trying to create is part of it for sure. But it has to serve the song, and if you serve the song, generally you're going to be in a good spot.
Well, I think that's a great caveat to. I don't think as many people know you as a looper yet, but so much of what I've seen in the last couple years, whether it be like the more DJ format stuff that you've done, or just some of your solo shows, kind of leans into this new genre. You see guys like Mark Ribier, and you see Ed Sheeran and whatnot. It's like folks have made this into a live production setting that it goes so much further than delegating a part and moving on. It's like it's a truer dynamic push than people understand. And taking a single note instrument onto that must have not been an easy task.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really, I mean, I've always been very, uh, I guess, I don't know if obsessed is the right word, but definitely very into DJ culture, just generally, so many of the tools that it's funny, going back to Bootsy, when I first started working with him, the thing that I worked in the studio with him more than anything wasn't bass. It was, he was showing me how to use an Akai MPC 2000.
Cool.
And so, I mean, I know that machine is almost as well as I know how to play bass now, just because of the experience he taught me, which guys like, Dr. Dre, and then, DJs like Deadmau5 and all those kind of people use too as well. So that side of stuff is something I've been always obsessed with, and getting to work with people like DJ Logic and Headtronics and stuff like that. Yeah, I've always leaned that direction. And then when, Roland came out with a unit a couple years ago, which was a game. I've been looping for years and years and years, but with my feet, with like, foot pedal type stuff. So over the pandemic, and I guess it was 2019, 2020, they came out with a new unit called the RC505, which is, it's basically a kind of like a loop station mixed with a DJ controller, is the easy way I can kind of explain it. So all the things
some onboard effects and
you can onboard effects, you can mix stuff in and out, you can do effects on the fly like that. So I mean, you're literally like being an instrumentalist / DJ kind of thing. So it was like, the big, like I saw the Scott, when I saw that thing, I was like, this is what I've been waiting for my entire life, and just like the MPC, the Akai MPC kind of changed the music industry. The RC505 has done that same thing too as well, whether it be loopers or beatboxers or DJs or whatever. And so that was the big game changer for me, where I was like, I think I can actually like not just, perform with this almost like, by myself, like as a solo artist with all the stuff that I do. And that's where I started kind of, going that direction. And it's funny because like now, a lot of my stuff is kind of starting to, my music, when it shows up and you kind of, read your stats and find out where it's popping up and what playlist it's popping up in, I'm starting to kind of pop in that world a lot more, which is really, I love it. It's just like wild, like, in that more the DJ electronica world, which is awesome because I love that world anyway.
Yeah. And your live stream shows have kind of, they've been built around that similar solo show. So like, what does your setup kind of entail in the studio versus when you do these festival dates as the solo Freekbass more DJ format?
Yeah, obviously like the staple of it is the RC505, like I said too as well. I'm using, TalkBox, vocoder type stuff too as well. All the pedals I'm using, and some keyboard and guitar. I'm doing a lot of guitar work too as well on top of bass stuff. So yeah, it's just a kind of a combination of everything. A lot of I spend hours and hours. Like when I do TikTok, it's funny because the illusion is that I just turn the camera on and the show starts like that. But those shows, if I'm like streaming, say for 2.5, 3 hours, which is generally what I do, 2 hours before I even go on, I'm prepping the show because I can't do the same show every night. So, whether it's creating new beats or different grooves or so that things like that too as well. So that's such a big part of it. Is like creating sound, soundscapes, I guess, and beats and all that kind of stuff too as well, which is, if you ever watch any extended videos with like guys like Deadmau5 or Daft Punk or Marshmello or anybody like that, so much of the time is spent in the studio just creating sonic landscapes, and that's such a big part of that cult, which I love. Going back to the earlier part of our conversation about, bass lines and moogs and all that kind of stuff, they all kind of work hand in hand, you know what I mean? Type thing.
Yeah. Well, that tone sculpting is such a
Mm.
tedious process, and I think one of the difficulties of the modern age of production is the way that MIDI information gives you a lot of raw space to kind of finagle and to work with things, but there's paralysis by analysis when it comes to choosing tones versus something like the Akai. It's like I know that this patch has always been bread and butter for my house stuff, or
Yeah.
this is gonna be my more, cutthroat top front of beat kinda stuff.
Yeah.
It's interesting the way that, classic pieces of analog gear are coming into the looper world in a more prominent way than a lot of people would imagine because we thought we were moving past that. We were going all in the box, and it's like, there's too many options when you get there.
Yeah, that's true. And there's just really yeah, I mean, there's things that can come close in the digital world to recreating it, but like the actual like physically putting your hands in moving, because with like so much of the analog, those sliders, with a lot of electroharmonic stuff, as I'm sure you're very familiar with, you move that little slider like just a fraction and it totally changes the tone, like pretty
Yeah.
radically too. So, and that's the beauty of it, is just like you said, tone sculpting, which is a great word. It's like you're doing that with each individual pedal, and then when you combine those pedals together, physically having your hands on it versus doing it within a laptop or something like that, there's just a different it's just a different way of working, and it feels more, it's even that it's an electronic world, it feels way more organic, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Absolutely. I had
Yeah.
a great experience the other day working with a bluegrass jam band in the studio by the name of Jam Band Jovi, where I'm in the universal audio world as well, and I've really enjoyed the analog interpretation of how that works. And I was working with the compressor, and the fiddle player says, "Oh, that really just bloomed." And it's like, what a great word that's kind of it's not very quantifiable, but there's like you said, there's this little bit of minutia that once you step into there, this tonality just blossoms in a way that everyone can feel. And
Yeah.
it's hard to do that when you're looking at an EQ on a computer and it's using a bunch of binary code to make this thing happen rather than you use some Wilson effects, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Mr. Kevin Wilson with these capacitors that we might kill over time of beating the hell out of them, but it's worth it because they warm up and they have this life to them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And also, we haven't talked too much about this, but also feel is such a, whether recording or performing live, especially with an electronic. There's a song of mine, my good friend Tall Shore produced. It's called "Love in Your Pocket" that we do, and I had the bass was done, the whole thing, and once we got the whole song done, we kind of did typical style. I had my verse part, I had my chorus part, and and everything was kind of cut and paste where it needed to be within Pro Tools. And he's like, "Okay, the song's done." He's like, "Now let's go recut the bass from beginning to end, one take." So it just got that, it wasn't like it was a really complicated bass part either, but it was just more to get that consistent like human feel through the entire song, and that just had a different, it just made it groove in a different kind of way versus just kind of cutting and pasting me in the verses and the choruses and that kind of thing too as well. And I try to do that on most of that's the one thing about being a bass player that's kind of nice, because half of our brains as a bass player were like a drummer, and half of it's more like a melodic instrument like guitar and keyboards were kind of that like kind of glue between the two. And being able to uh, bring that human element into whatever medium you're doing is such a big part of it.
Absolutely, and I think that's a brilliant tip for a lot of folks that are getting into production, myself included, kind of needing to hear that because you don't appreciate what it's like on the receiving end of audio files till you're doing it not just start to finish, but trying to craft out an arrangement. True
Yeah.
production is trying to pull the greatest moments out of this and organize them in a way that, like you kind of alluded to with that slide track, is like, needs to be hypnotic. I
Yes.
need you to not only want to sing the chorus the second time it comes around, but what's that one part of that bass line, or what's that drum fill? It's like this needs to ingrain itself and be the earworms that brings you back. And the more that you can pile those up in a way that feels cohesive, the better chance you have at kind of going through the steps of consumption. Did I like the song? Do I know the song?
Yeah.
Do I love the song? Did I need the song? And now is it part of my life? It's an
Right.
interesting thing to feel like you're soundtracking people's day-to-day life. But especially, someone said this to me the other day. Funk is an incredible medium of feeling,
Yeah.
in the same way that all music can be. But a lot of
Sure.
people come to funk for a sense of lift and progression and kind of the energy to move forward with life. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of music that can be somber. It can help you kind of reflect on what is going on internally. Funk is something to get you out of it.
Yeah, true, true. And building on that, like someone like the Funkadelic tracks and P Funk classic tracks and even Sly for that matter, even Stevie Wonder for that matter, they may be in one key the entire song. There may not be any chord changes, but there's again going back to the Papa Was a Rolling Stone thing. Why can you sit there for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes and not feel like you're bored 3 minutes into it? Because it's constantly, yeah, it's in one key and there's not chord changes, but it's building the entire time, and it's like painting different textures. Like if you listen to like so much of the Funkadelic, especially the Parliament stuff, it's like the vocal stacks and the way the horns are stacked. It's like, yeah, they're playing the same lick over and over again, but it keeps evolving through the entire song. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it really does take a lot of maturity to learn how to love doing those things. Like, we all have a tendency as musicians, the 50th time we play this on a bunch of road dates that feel
Yeah,
never ending, and the hotel rooms start to feel the same. Uh, Monotony can get the best of you, but the folks that are coming out to the show tonight, this is the one date that they get to be there for.
for
Uh,
sure.
so after years of these songs and these moments, is there any kind of routine that you give yourself to try to stay fresh on material that is routine in some ways?
Yes, for sure. 100%. Yes, I agree. Yeah. And that's again the exciting thing about playing, whether it's live or live streaming live. There's the X factor of you never know what, like you can have everything set up perfectly in your head how you think it's going to go, but whether it's an audience watching you online or they're watching you actually live in the venue, that they become part of the band too, and part of the music, and that dictates where everything's going to go as well. It becomes bigger than you, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has the live streaming helped your crowd work in that way? Like, you have a uh, very familiar presence to what is the P-Funk era of how you get people involved in shows. But to do that through a screen that doesn't necessarily give back to you, it's more of verbal interactions. Has that kind of taken you to a new level of understanding with that? Or is it a totally different thing to you?
Well, a new understanding and a totally different thing, I think, because it's funny you bring that up, because I was just talking to, like, last night when I was live streaming my community about this, and it's almost like this new form of music. Like the way I interact on TikTok, if I went out on a live stage and started talking to the audience like that, they'd be like, "Dude, what are you doing?" You're like, I couldn't talk to it would be weird, like me talking but I can sit here and play a song as I'm sitting here having a conversation with someone, and either talking about the song or what we're doing with the song or building on the song or what I'm going to do next in the song. So it's almost like this new form of art in a way, live streaming for a musician, because you're able to do things you can't do on a live, like a live setting. You're like, and a lot of it is the communication, talking to your community, and which is what they become part of the music as well. I mean, I'm very, very, of course I'd be making music if I wasn't live streaming, but like a lot of these songs, we've been releasing one single a month. We're on our fifth month this month. And they're all songs that I've created on TikTok. Like I bring the initial idea in, and I'm doing a million songs a night, but like you can just start feeling like people start reacting to certain songs just like you do in a live market. So they start kind of reacting to those songs more, and then they might be like, "Hey, that's cool how the blah 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 part happens," and you're like, "Oh, I never thought about that," and you can see them kind of like geeking out on that part of the song. So certain songs that are now on my Spotify and Apple Music and all that out there would not be on there right now had that I had not had that reaction from those people on the, so they're like kind of executive producers. That's what I always tell them. They're like, they're like, this works, this doesn't work. They're not like saying this doesn't work or this works. They're just reacting, and that's the songs become, they become real, and it's
Yeah.
a very, very cool thing. Yeah.
Well, and one interesting opportunity, and I think calling them executive producers is a very loving way to approach that, because you want to give them some kind of feeling of participation that feels credible.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of folks, like, they're almost like they're a market test of what's going on. You got a finger on the pulse of how this song's going, and they're giving you that immediate feedback that, 20 years ago, you'd have to pay for people to come in. The type of people that come in for this kind of
Right.
thing are
Right.
are a very specific style listener, versus these are fans that want to be there during the process. And now you get to kind of supersede steps of this. Uh, Now, your most recent visit to TikTok, you kind of did a live stream in your typical format with a live studio audience. Was that kind of jarring to be in this very conversational, through the camera lens with a bunch of people behind you? Like, I've been watching this dude shake that ass for a long time now. Like,
Yeah. It was a little, different, but it was still, the energy was, it was a really cool energy, because it was weird too, because, your community was still there on screen. They were still with us, like they always are with me. But then you had also all these other people around you too as well. So I'm thinking you're probably referring to when I was streaming from my agency is out of California too. So that was
okay.
my agency has actually a live streaming house. No one lives there. It's just specifically for live streaming. They're called Taboost, and that's who, when I guess I was on TikTok for 2 or 3 months, and they reached out to me about managing me on TikTok. And I was like, this sounds like manage me on TikTok. What? This is
Yeah.
weird. Like, is this like a scam? What's going, it felt awkward because they approached me and I didn't know what their deal was. And that's what they do. They literally, like, that part of my career, I have a manager that just does all my TikTok stuff now, and they're incredible, and they have created so many opportunities, and they're just great to be, and there's so many ins and out of that platform, because it's constantly growing every day. I mean, it's different now than it even was 6 months ago in terms of, like,
Yeah.
with live streaming. And so to have that overlooker for all that kind of stuff is just incredible. But that was done, and they do events at this house all the time. They're in Beverly Hills out in California. It's a really beautiful house in a beautiful part of California, and do that type of thing there all the time. And it was super cool, but it was super wild, because for the reason you mentioned, because it was, you're having live audience there as you're also streaming too as well. It was cool. It was kind of like the best of both worlds. You're getting the whole everything.
Yeah. Well, and there's a really good point in that for people that love the music industry, that aren't musicians, that want to be involved. The new music industry doesn't look like taking an internship at a label and trying to rise in the ranks, and maybe one day becoming an A&R, then starting to find your bread and butter and go that way. It's almost like specializing on these certain platforms. And there's a risk to that. One day Facebook may not be there, one day TikTok may not be there,
Sure.
but trying to learn how to authentically engage people through these vessels in a way that feels like you've gained experience, and like a genuine interest in how people interact on them. So then artists like you can go from being a festival circuit gem, and someone that you can only see for 8 months of the year, and the other times you're in the studio, to now being something that's on your phone 3 days a week, 5 days a week. How often do you stream at this point?
I'm 6 days a week. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, the only night I had Saturday's my only day off, and that's because I'm a huge soccer fan, and that's soccer day. Yeah.
Yeah,
So so I'm every single night, 10 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah. Yeah.
that's awesome. And then would you recommend for folks that are looking to step into those platforms to get that consistent, or would you say ramp up slowly and find out what you want to do on it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say consistency is always the main thing. The main question I have, a lot of people, that ask me about TikTok, or is like, especially when it comes to videos, not the live streaming, like, what's the best time to post? Is it like 2 in the afternoon or 10 o'clock at night? I was like, I post stuff. It doesn't matter when you, in my opinion, it doesn't matter when you post. You just need to post consistently. And that, I think that's the hardest thing about being, whether it be a live streamer and or creator and going in that thing. It's just, you're constantly having to feed the dragon all the time. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
you always have to have content. That doesn't mean you have to film all content every single day. You can have a big, archive of it too as well. But as far as the live streaming thing, because I streamed a lot before I started on TikTok. I was on Twitch for a long time too as well, which is another great live streaming platform for musicians. And the big thing is just consistency and being on there for, I would say, at least at the minimum an hour. Try to make it pushing hour and a half, 2 hours, just so it takes a while for both for the algorithm reason to kind of have it filter through the algorithm and through the system too as well. Twitch is very much like that. The longer you stream, the more you start going up in terms of like their showing up on their pages and stuff like that and other people's feeds and stuff like that. And so yeah, when I first started, I think I was doing like 2 or 3 days a week, and then but the other bit of advice I would say is, no matter when you do it at that time every day. Like, if you're going to stream at 3 in the afternoon, be 3 every day, or 5. It almost becomes up. You're like a TV show. You know what I mean? It's like, and
Mhm.
that, like, I could turn on the TV at 10 o'clock and watch, Game of Thrones on a Sunday night on HBO or whatever it is you watch. You want to have that same kind of thing where people know that and I've been literally like 5 or 7 minutes late before, and I start getting people DM and like, dude, well, where you at? What's going on? And is everything, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's just a technical thing. Sometimes you just can't, there's some always weird little glitchy things that happen sometimes. And, but yeah, just the consistency thing is the biggest. And just, and that's kind of like, I don't care what your career is, being consistent, that you can apply that. You could say that if I was trying to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever the case may be, is just people, they want to be able to rely on you to know that you're going to be there at that time type
Yeah.
thing.
When dependability means something to listeners and folks that give you that time of day, it's like,
Yeah,
I think one of the hardest thing about falling in love with a band is watching that band break up. Like, so
sure.
many people go through these eras of dedicating themselves as I forget what the term is, uh, but like the first followers of whether it's products or people or personalities. Those folks are so gung ho about this thing that there's two painful options. They get too big and they don't care about the people in the same way,
Yeah.
or they stop doing it. And both of those have very different ups and downs. So before you venture into a live stream capacity, knowing what you're willing to do for the next decade of your life, and as lofty as that feels, like having your fun with it is as important as them having fun with it. If you just follow trends, you're going to follow trends for the rest of your career. Versus if you do what you did, which is carve out a lane that feels genuine to what you've always done and who you've always been, then it doesn't feel like as much of a burden to bear. It feels like it's your regular. It's your 10 o'clock every night, baby.
Well, yeah, and then also people really, being authentic now online. That's the one thing I think about being online, is that no matter what genre of music, or no matter whatever you do as a creator online, especially, people can really feel like, companies that go on, like, say, TikTok, and try to do these like big overly produced commercials. They just don't work. People see through that really, really quick. That's why I think, like, micro influencers have become so big, because it's like, yeah, this person might not have 1 million followers, but if they have like 50,000 followers, but they have those dedicated 50,000 followers, and if you talk about something that you really like, whether it be, one thing for me, for instance, is like, people ask me about my bass strings like all the time. I work with this really cool company called DR Strings. I'm sure you know DR Strings. They're great, great people. I love them so much. And because I have these like neon green strings, and they really pop on the screen. So, and when I'm talking about them, I'm enthusiastic about them because I really am. It's not like I'm trying to like, hey, I endorse these strings, so you have to, it's like, it doesn't seem fake, because it's not fake, because I love the strings. So people can sense that, I think, and that comes with the music or whatever you're doing, or online. So if you're authentic to who you are and everything, there's so much niche things nowadays. You can, I could be a bass player that loves to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and there's going to be an audience that likes to do the same thing out there. Maybe a
Yeah,
small audience, but there's still going to be an audience that likes that. And that's what's cool.
totally. Being willing to get specific with who you are, like that's one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask you. That I think a lot of folks, when they're starting to envision themselves going from singing in their bedroom to being an artist that people want to follow, they say, Dan Smith, or whatever their regular person is, needs to be a character. And sometimes that character gets to be this thing that's totally outside of you, that you sculpt this thing that you play and you step out of. Or there's folks like what I assume you are as Freekbass, which is an eccentric version of yourself through this lens of what you've made your name and your essence and all these things. Like, did it take you a while to discover who Freekbass was, or was that always just you pushing the envelope of what you were?
No, it definitely, for sure. It took me a while to figure out how far to make I don't want to say make myself larger than life, but the, how far to push things. And sometimes if that's the advantage, I think, whether it be touring and or during live streaming. Like, for instance, if you only play, like, let's say if you only play Cincinnati and you play one club once a month for 2 or 3 years, right? You're only going to be able to gauge like what the response, whether it be to a song or who you are as a performer on stage, by that one specific demo audience. Where if you're touring, in Cincinnati, you may play the song and people may be like, yeah, that's okay. But you may go play in Rochester, New York, and people are like, whoa, that song is the bomb. Or you may go play it on this streaming platform and people really react to it. So you have to have different test markets, whether it be for your songs or for who you are as a performer too, as well. And that's the thing that, I've found, and that's a lot of trial and error and feeling who you can be. Like, if I went up on, the one thing I've learned about myself, if I went up on stage with t-shirt and jeans on, that's when I would feel like I'm wearing a costume, not when I'm wearing all this crazy, like I wear dress crazy, obviously, but it's like, that feels more me. Me dressing down would feel like I'm dressing up, like, and it's almost kind of like, the suit, the classic from Kill Bill, I think it's Kill Bill 2, Volume 2, about like Superman, Clark Kent thing. It's like where Bill is saying, Clark Kent was Superman wasn't the costume, was Superman. Like, he said, that's the big difference between, I always love this thing. He's like, that's the big difference between Superman and all the other superheroes, where Batman, Bruce Wayne was he was Bruce Wayne, and he put on the Batman costume. Peter Parker put on the Spider-Man costume. Well, the costume for Superman was Clark Kent. He is Superman. The costume. So it's kind of like, and again, I'm not trying to say I'm Superman, but I'm just saying, like, that whoever you are, like, be comfortable in that skin. And sometimes my skin is more like Liberace's skin versus the Bruce Springsteen skin or whoever's skin, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because that's who I am, it's like, but that doesn't mean I'm expecting, you shouldn't be that, if it's, you gotta be you. And if you are if you are a t-shirt and jeans person, that's awesome. And people will feel that's how they connect, you know what I mean? So
well, I think that's a really
sorry.
profound, honest point to make to people, because so many of us modify who we are for the satiation of other people. We're constantly making choices based on how we want other people to perceive us, and especially, you put that really well. And one thing that I've experienced with just today's conversation, the other times that we've interacted, is like, Freekbass visually is the guy that's on Bass Player magazine, and it's like, this is a character that people can see and say, I want to figure out that. But your spoken demeanor is this that's the blue jeans denim. It's like, that's this down to earth, exactly what you're getting in that. and people finding that Venn diagram of who they are in terms of approachability, but also larger than life in the ways that you are an eccentric, in the ways that you are Liberace, in the ways that you are fucking Superman, you know, and how
Right.
you want to step into that skin.
Yeah, so true. And that, going back to the live streaming thing, that's been the really nice thing about that, is that all those vulnerabilities, you can let people in on those things, and all those things, and they see the full, the blue, as well. Even that I'm wearing like a, fake fur jacket and scarves and crazy sunglasses, that they can see that, like you said, the blue jean denim person, that I know this. I know I'm a goofball as much as I'm a goofball, and that kind of changes the whole dynamic quite a bit too as well. You're not just seeing this stagnant two-dimensional character, you're seeing the three-dimensional person too as well, and that's one
Absolutely.
thing for live too. You want to try to as much as possible, you want to translate that too as well, if you can. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's so hard to figure out how you want to speak to an audience on stage. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going through an era of kind of reinventing the character I want to play on stage, and trying to figure out how you speak to an audience, and how that feels to you in retrospect. You know, like the reason you watch back your shows is not to figure out how they reacted to you. You know what you felt in the moment, but what that is in the objective, separated lens is a totally different thing, and it deserves your time and compassion to allow yourself to bloom like a compressor does, and to get in the minutia of what feels all right and what feels great. It's just a little turn of a knob, or it's this guitar versus that amp, and all these things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. And again, it's just doing it, going back to the consistency thing, just going out and doing it and evolving and that's the fun part about the journey, is watching that whole thing, and then going even into the songwriting stuff. I mean, you're a songwriter, you know how it is. It's like um, I think the, one that, let me say this. So, back, oh shoot, like, about 15, 20 years ago, I went to London and spent about a month there, and it was to find out, so much of the music I like was from the UK, whether it be, classic rock like Zeppelin, to of course the Beatles, but like even more modern stuff, Radiohead, or so much UK music that I've always been drawn to. And I'm like, why is that? Like, what is it? What is that thing that is different from the UK music than United States music? And that, I think I might have at least partially figured it out. So we stayed in that. I went with a couple friends, and we stayed in this kind of band house over there and outside of London. And there was a guy, like, over here in the States, before you start writing songs, there's this thing. It's like, okay, I'm gonna learn all my scales. I'm gonna get very fluent on my instrument. I'm gonna get, do perfect. And then I'll start like writing songs or performing live or whatever. There was a guy that was singing at the house. He'd been playing guitar maybe for 2 months, he could play like one or two notes, right? But he's sitting there on the steps inside of this house over, and he's trying to write a song. Like, can barely even play, but he's already thinking about songwriting. And I think that's kind of like, at least that in a nutshell, that was like, okay, as you're learning to be a better instrumentalist, you're also learning to be a better songwriter. Just like you learn about playing notes on your instrument and how to move your fingers here and there. Songwriting's the same way. It's like, there's, whether it be lyric writing or production or, putting chords together, that's a process you have to learn too. What works, what doesn't, what's, you get better at it, especially with lyrics. Is such a bit, those lyrics that I wrote 20 years ago, I'm like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. You know what I mean? And not that I'm trying to say that I'm, the best lyricist in the world now, but it's like, still though, it's just so much of that filtering process, and I think that's a big important thing. I keep going back to it, but like, as you're learning your instrument, learning about writing songs. When I teach theory on lessons, whether it be on guitar or bass, I'm always trying to say, like, how can you take this? I remember knowing all the scales and arpeggios and everything you needed to know, but when I went to my first band practice, like, I was like, I don't know how to like solo or write it. Even that I knew the knowledge of it, I didn't know how to do it. And so, and what I learned is that, like, so much stuff with scales and stuff like that, it's just literally sometimes just playing the scale sounds awesome, but you're thinking, oh, that's kind of like cheating. You just can't play the scale. That's weird, And it's like, so one thing with when I teach, I always try to like say, how can we take this scale or this arpeggio or this mode or whatever and make it a musical idea, not just moving your fingers like this direction, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what two characters that I wanted to kind of chat about are my big brother and mentor T Sly, and
Oh
then
yeah.
one of our mutual favorites, Tobot, the beautiful Toby
Oh yeah,
Donahue,
yeah, yeah. Production on him. Yeah, yeah,
the master of the grid, man. Like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
when I get in Logic and I'm using like the auto snap and I feel like I have things lined up right, it's like no, it's not lined up right because you need to know the space around the grid markers, not the grid markers. And
yeah,
Toby is the man at that. It's like
yeah. Oh yeah,
everything on the Power of the One, that Bootsy record is just like, oh, it feels like Toby.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, for
and
sure.
how much of your career has been kind of shaped and shifted by the influence of bandmates over the years versus now where in the looping facility you kind of have this unencumbered vision of what the sounds are and what you're playing.
That's a great question. Whether it be, Toby, obviously I worked with Toby many years myself, and he's taught me so much about production. I mentioned earlier DJ Logic, was a huge influence on me. Like we would do the Edtronics project that we did. It was myself, DJ Logic, and Steve Molis predominantly. Richard Fortas from Guns N' Roses went out with us for a couple times. Bernie, when Steve wasn't able to be there, Bernie Worrell went out with, it was me, DJ Logic, and Bernie. And the full 2 hour show was 100% improvisation. Like literally, DJ Logic would start a beat, I'd make up a bass line, and then everybody start, and it would just evolve to wherever it evolved to. And so seeing how those and watching him, back at the hotel room, like how are you putting those beats together, and like, why are you choosing this one, and that type of thing. So I would have never known for my own beat creation. I would have never known that. And going back to the Bootsy thing with the MPC, the knowledge I learned from Bootsy about how to sample and where to drop. You mentioned about the grids and stuff like that, and where to lay them within the grid to get a feel the way you want it to feel a certain way, is just, it's you couldn't get that. I don't care what music school you get. I mean, that's where I got so much from working. Yeah, so you're learning from working with other musicians, and T Slide too as well. He's great with production. I mean, everybody is just like, it's so important. And if you ever get a chance as a musician to, pick someone's brain and learn how they do that, whatever it is they do, especially if you like their style of music, just try to live in their world as much as you can, for sure.
Yeah, one having that willingness to bring them in for certain projects, whether it's a
Yeah,
producer on one particular piece or saying, "Hey, let's do a 7-day run and spend some uninterrupted time together, just improvising and seeing how things kind of run." Like that, I think the limitation of a classic band format is if things go well, it's you and these 6 other guys for eternity.
yeah,
Versus when you're willing to carve out your own lane as an artist, you can bring in folks as it pleases and serves you, and as they're willing to find yourself forever living with their thumbprint, feeling bettered by the experience.
yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You could have said it better. You said it perfect.
Well, and as we wrap this up, brother, a couple things I just want to tell you, and then my final question is, in the impact you've had on Cincinnati and the way that you have preserved this city's legacy of funk and continue to push it forward, and the ambassador that you are for us for the rest of the world. It's so appreciated the way that you genuinely approach other people's coming to the music. It's not that you need to love Freekbass. That Freekbass is going to teach you how to love yourself, the music, and what you create in that. So I am forever grateful for all the things you do for your listeners and our whole city.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I mean, I wear Cincinnati on my sleeve. Probably for people that aren't in Cincinnati, probably obnoxiously too much because I wear it so much on my sleeve. But it's like, I mean, of course, I'd be playing music no matter what part of the world I grew up in. But I mean, I literally would not sound the way I sound if I had not grown up here in this city. I mean, I guess everybody could say that, but like, the rich history we have, especially on the funk side of stuff, too, as well. Going, from Bootsy to Midnight Star to King Records, just the DNA of this city is just like, yeah, there are those cities like that in the United States, but we have a very distinctive DNA. And I always say with Cincinnati specifically, because we're not New York and we're not LA, you know, we were like the kid in the back of the classroom that had to like yell a little bit louder and put our hand up a little holler. And like, you know, that's why you get bands like Zap and Bootsy where it's like, okay, you want to talk about playing on the one, we're going to play on the dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 like Cincinnati funk's different than any other funk. I mean, everybody's got, you know, Minneapolis has their sound, New Orleans has their sound, obviously, Oakland, California, San Francisco, everybody's got their own distinctive sound when it comes to the funk. But Cincinnati and Dayton, you know, we have our definitely, and Ohio, just in general, have our very distinctive sound. And again, for those reasons, I think.
Yeah. So as someone that wears it on your sleeve and is not only proud of it, but is uh, progressing that sound and how it relates to the people of this part of the world, what are your hopes for Cincinnati and Ohio as a music community as time goes on that you've pushed for over your career?
Well, you know, every day, and I know this is one of the big things I know on Bootsy's plate too, as well as you know, we hear all the fact that the King Records thing, the legacy of King Records, is such a huge, huge thing. I've done a lot of uh, you know, benefits and you know, benefit albums and stuff like that for that. I think that's so important. Just like Memphis has Sun and Stax, and you know, hopefully one day King Records being an actual museum, which is, I know, the idea what it's supposed to be. It's on the historical register now, which was a huge thing, so that that building will be there forever, which is awesome. And then
Yes.
hopefully now we can turn that building into like a museum piece, which which it will be. But just, you know, just bringing, you know, the attention of the world. And I think it's more and more people are seeing it more and more every day now, but like, you know, how big a piece of music history this city is. You know, there's certain things, you know, as we know, all the James Brown hits were recorded here. You know, James is not from, he's from Augusta, Georgia, but like all his hit songs recorded here, and the all the music that comes out of this area, and even on the bluegrass side of stuff too, not just the funk side of stuff. And you know, and even like the, you know, I don't know what the word you use for alt rock side, you know, from people, bands like Afghan Wigs and stuff like that that have come out of this city. That's what I think, you know, Seattle, for instance, had like a very distinctive sound, and that they were known for, like the Nirvanas of the world and Soundgardens and kind of the whole grunge scene in the 90s. Um, which I think is unique about Cincinnati is the fact that we, you know, will have funk, but there'll be bluegrass and there'll be alt rock. And it's like there's this really great music community here too as well. And it's just an exciting place. You know, I wouldn't want to grow up anywhere else in the world than here, because just from what I've learned on the musical side, my opportunities, you know, I'm not sure if I would have the career that I have, you know, that I've had, at least the longevity of my career. And it's from not all the people that I've met, whether it be the Bootsies or the Tobys or whoever. Everybody's learning all the time from all these amazing community of musicians here.
Yeah, well, I think one of the great things you're doing, especially on the live streaming front, is when you go to LA, when you go to Seattle, when you go to New York, these hubs are proud of the folks that are of their same soil and lifestyle, and they feel the city in that kind of a way. What the hell's going on with the stars in the background?
Wow, that was
Right.
a like perfect with what you were talking about. But go ahead, yeah,
That's WEBN fireworks, baby.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but teaching people to embrace the history, to be proud of the locals, to ask more of what's going on in the scene. Like, I hate to be a dead horse, but the way that we get labeled a cover band city at times in the current state of things is a disservice to all of us for the ability to be Superman and live your life as Clark Kent. You know, it's
Yeah,
like if you sell yourself short of just satiating the lowest hanging fruit kind of needs. It's like I get you want to hear "Don't Stop Believing," but you have a phone that can do that. At this point in
right.
my life, the best thing I could give you is what I wrote last night. That's not finished, but it is what life is like right here in this city right now.
Yeah,
And so the way that you continually embrace this town and you know continually sharpen the sword of what you do in your craft and give us something to be proud of is something we are all forever grateful for, my brother. And
Oh, thank you.
I hope to do the same in a long-lasting career, to bring more folks home to Cincinnati to understand that this is a dirty little river that loves you back. Okay, and we ain't going nowhere.
Oh, that's great. Well, I appreciate that. And you are, and you're carving your niche right now as we speak, which is awesome, you know, and it's like constantly evolving and being willing to, I mean, I think that's the big thing in any career is being willing to change with what's like, don't be afraid of change, you know, don't feel like if you had like a successful in one thing that worked for that particular time, but you know, things are always changing and evolving, and so just roll with it, you know, and be excited about it. You know, I love all the new things that are, I mean, we talked a lot about live streaming and the whole new virtual world that we're in. And it's like, you know, even like, you know, everybody's getting so freaked out about AI and stuff like that. I think it's awesome. You know, it's like still you're going to need, just like we were talking about earlier about me having to recut the bass through the whole song all the way there. It's like, yeah, there's this technology for me to cut and paste. I can get 4 measures and get it perfect and do like that. That's basically AI, a version of AI, but it sounds and feels a lot different if I do it, play it all the way through. But there's elements of the cutting pasting that's still happening within the track, but then there's the live element to it as well. So if you work with it as opposed to trying to work against it, because it's not going away, it's just always going to evolve. Work with it as opposed to trying to work against it, and it'll all work for everybody, I think.
Yeah, if the tech does its best job, it brings us closer to each other, you
Yeah.
know, and you got to learn how that lens views you and how you view that lens. But you're definitely making it happen by spreading who you are as a person and a teacher and an artist every single day, brother. So, my friends, that's the Weekly Wave. Freekbass on at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. Is that right?
7 p.m. Pacific. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
On TikTok, are you still on Twitch at all?
Once in a while, I'm doing, like, again, I'm doing so much TikTok right now. It's kind of my main focus, but you know, but yeah, I'll pop on there occasionally too as well. Yeah.
Cool. And in whatever ways you can support my friends, the live shows, the merch, the streaming, please check him out. He is Cincinnati's gem, and we appreciate you, brother. Thanks for the time.
Well, thank you, and thanks for doing this too, Matt.
Hell yeah. All right, peace, players.